All right. And we're going to open in prayer. So we say, thank you, Mother, Father, God, for this joyous time together as we look with new eyes and new perspective at that traditional text, sacred text we call the Bible. And with a breath, we just center and focus to the now present moment, letting anything go that we've dealt with during the day and just be present to the knowledge and the wisdom. And we say, thank you, thank you, thank you, God. Amen. Okay, so we're just going to we started with prayer, but I didn't do a check-in on here, so we're just going to go through and we're going to check in. So let me minimize this because let me try to move this. Ah, there you are, you're back, okay. Oh, why do I not do that? There, all right. No, I don't want that. Ah, there. How did I get? Okay. I have fat fingers. No, this is the church's computer, and I'm not always sure what I'm doing. So, how was your week?
Did you hear that Jenny might have to? She's going to go pick up her car, but she's going to stay on her headphones.
Okay. That's good, Jenny. Just,
What happened?
You're fine. You do what you need to do. I'm recording it.
Okay.
You can always pick it up. I know. I sent it to
Okay.
last week, the one that we did, because I still haven't got them online yet. I will get them online eventually. But I just want to.
Mm-hmm. So how was your week?
How was your all's week?
It was good.
Was good? Jenny, have you been resting most of the week?
Off and on. I've been, I'm still teaching, so off and on. I do have, kind of a concern, but a Thanksgiving, because my car overheated, and that's why it's in the shop. But it was much less expensive than it could have been, so yay God.
Yay.
Good. Carla, how's your week?
They go so fast, and it's just so fun and exciting right now, and I'm totally blissed out today. We got to go see both of our little 1-year-old and our little 2-year-old grandsons at their music class together. It was so much fun. So we're having a ball, and Darcy went with us today and started us on the process. We've been going to fix up part of our house for a couple of years, and it's just taken us forever to get started on things. And that's moving along, and Darcy, my bonus daughter, Pete's daughter, is an interior designer, and she met us at a tile store today, and we had so much fun. So anyway, I don't know how I could be happier or be more fun busy.
Good.
And I'm taking 2 classes, and I'm loving them.
Good. So it hasn't, you're doing all right taking the 2 classes because you had some concerns, the busyness.
Yeah, it's fun. And I'm so glad to know you all. I'm so thankful. Each one of you are like a little bright spot for me in my heart.
Well, you are in ours also, in mine at least.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's been a really busy week. Busy at work, busy at home. We have some friends coming in from Minnesota to stay with us for a couple of days. So I took tomorrow off so I can, clean and get the room ready and go to the grocery store because we've got something going on every night this week. And we have the ballet on Saturday and the annual meeting on Sunday. And it's crazy. And they're supposed to be at our house sometime on Tuesday. So I'm cleaning tomorrow or it's not getting done. And then they'll never come and visit us again. It's been a good week. It's been really busy. I always, it's interesting because sometimes when it's not real busy and I sit a lot and don't have a lot to do, I just feel horrible. I just kind of feel draggy. But when I have days where I'm busy and doing stuff and trying to get stuff done before the end of the day, I, at least have more energy. My body maybe doesn't feel a whole lot better, but I have a lot more energy, and that's good.
Yay.
Yeah, it's been a good week so far.
Yeah. Mine too. Been interesting and busy and continues to be
Yeah.
busy.
We did there was a group here on Monday night that were invited in out of the millennial group that you guys had. And they showed us, it's like a Brazilian martial art thing. And I don't remember what it's called, but
Caparillo? Something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Anyway, so they brought in musical instruments and there was music and we got to actually try it. And it was so much fun. And I got up and did all the movements as much as I could, ended up throwing a kick at the guy's head, landed on my back because my foot slipped out from underneath me. It was just hysterically funny and a lot of fun. And then I had a little bit of difficulty walking yesterday.
Oh my gosh.
But it was fun. We had a great time.
Yeah.
So we're thinking that, and there were 15 people there, 7 of them and 8 of us. And so we're thinking we might possibly do it again.
Yay.
Yeah.
Valerie, were you the one that said yes to the Love Trumps Hate thing? That was really cool, and I saw us on the news. Unity, anyhow.
Well, let's put it this way. It was Reverend Ray and I both.
Yay.
He approached me about it, and I said, well, I don't know. I have to ask Rev Ray. And so I asked Ray, and he said yes, and so we said yes, and it was very interesting. It's funny how the media always puts their slant on things, but
yes,
we had, at the height of the evening, 200 people, 30 to 40 of them being children, because it was a family-friendly event, and of those children, there were probably 10 that were under the age of 2. And Jackson, who is just a real sweetheart and is wonderful with children, she was one of the organizers, and they had it set up beautifully for the children. And everybody got to express love, and they got to be who they were, and people were included that are excluded in a lot of places. There was one young lady there who said that she's transgender, and she had not been in the church since she was about the age of 6 because she wasn't accepted anywhere. So this was her first experience in a church, and she was one of the people that helped Pinky set up, and she was just a lovely being, and she did belly dancing, and it was fun.
Yay!
Mm-hmm. So we had...
I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Was that the Love Trumps Hate
Yes.
rally that they had? Was that downtown, or was that held at Unity?
The Love Trumps Hate rally was really at Unity, and it was about a rally about standing in love and diversity. So we had Palestinian community here. We had Interfaith Pastor Pete, the Unitarians, lots of young families, millennials with young children who want the world to be a good place for their children and just feel like they're not really fit anywhere else. There's this guy who was doing affirmations for the city. You could write your affirmation and place it on the map in the city. And he was a character. He had on these a pink tutu with his bright pants, but he could do it there, and nobody, it was fun. And the kids had a good time.
Awesome.
Poetry reading, songs, some young African Americans, singing and things like that. So just a very diverse, eclectic group. It was fun. I didn't get to stay for all of it, but I was here.
I hope some of them come back to our community.
I
You
think
know?
they will, especially, yeah, I think they will.
Yay.
So, yeah.
That's awesome. I wanted to come. I was teaching with the VA last night,
Oh, yeah,
so but it looked awesome. I shared it on Facebook.
good. All right, well, let's get started. Not that we're not already started, but okay, what do we have left from last week? Anything? Does anybody have anything left from last week? And did you get a chance to look at what
I did,
would you like to present to us?
unless somebody else has something they want to do first.
Okay. So has anybody got anything that we need to look at from last week? Any questions that you had about any of the material we covered or anything like that? Okay.
So before the end of the night, I asked the question, when and why did the Sabbath change from Saturday to Sunday? And I'm guessing, Carla, that I found a lot of the stuff online that you also found. What's really interesting is that depending on which website you go to, each one of them is basically sponsored by a specific group. And depending on their frame of mind and point of view, will determine what the answer is that you get. So what I found was that the Seventh-day Adventists are saying that Sabbath never changed from Saturday to Sunday. There is no biblical historical reason why it would have changed from Saturday to Sunday. So if you are worshiping on Sunday, you are not a Christian, because there's no biblical reason for people to be worshiping on Sunday. We're supposed to be doing it on Saturday, and anybody who doesn't is just plain flat out wrong. If you go to the Catholic website, what they say is that the reason that it changed is because the Catholic Church switched it. Because if you read in Paul and some of his letters, in the scriptures, it will say things like, Jesus was raised on Sunday, the Pentecost happened on Sunday, the first day. And so it's not that the Sabbath switched, because we're not Jewish. We don't, the Sabbath is still Saturday, but we're not Jewish. We don't follow the Sabbath any longer. We celebrate the Lord's Day. And it was the Catholic Church. They took credit for it. And then if you go to other websites, they'll say the Catholics are taking credit for this, but they're completely wrong, because it actually happened when Constantine, in the 3rd century, in like 325, when he told everybody they had to be Christian, but everybody was pagan. They worshiped the sun god, and Sunday was the day of the sun. And so it wasn't a worship day, it was actually a rest day. And people just turned it into a worship day because Constantine made it a day where people didn't have to work. And yet there are also scriptural references to, coming together and making offerings and stuff on the first day in Paul and some of his writings. So the bottom line is, just about every website that I looked at, they're looking at the whole situation from the point of view that this guy's writing about. It's the literal, factual, and they've all got their own opinion about what that is, all of those lenses. And so the conclusion that I've come to is, who really cares? And it's all about deepening your relationship with the God of your understanding. Every day is a worship day, or can be, and it really doesn't matter. And nobody really knows when and why it changed, but there's lots of opinions about it. So, and at this point, I think the reason we do church on Sunday is because it's what we've historically done for quite a long time. And, why change it if it's working?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Even though it makes us...
You did a beautiful job with that.
Yep. Excellent
yeah,
job.
It's the one website that I found that was maybe possibly slightly less biased was the one... which one was this? It was like gotquestions.org. And they're maybe a little bit less biased about the whole thing, because they actually talk about, the Sabbath on Saturday, and the stuff in John and Matthew and Mark on Sunday, and, all of that. And, The Sabbath is still on Saturday, not Sunday, and it has never been changed, but the Sabbath is part of the Old Testament law, and Christians are free from the bondage of the law. So gotquestions.org is slightly less biased, maybe. But boy, Seventh-day Adventists are really rabid about the fact that if you don't celebrate on Saturday, you are not Christian. I was surprised.
Me too.
Did you learn your lesson asking too many questions?
I did. I will never ask another question in this class as long as I am here.
Now, see, you shouldn't do that, because who knows? There's no real requirement yet for paper. We haven't decided of what we're going to do here.
Yeah. And do you really, truly think that I'm going to stop talking? I mean, seriously. Does anyone think that I'm going to stop talking? Probably not going to happen.
All right.
I tell you, that helps keep us alive, being curious. I think that's crucial to a full life.
Mm-hmm.
It is.
Yeah. It was interesting, though, how closely most of the websites followed along what he was writing about in this book, about how the way people read the Bible and how, it's like, this is what God says rather than was written in response to what they were seeing. And, I didn't find really any of especially the church websites, where they were looking at anything other than that literal historical lens. Mm-hmm. It's like, this is what the Bible says, and so there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Good. All right. Anybody else have anything left from last week that we need to talk about? Okay, what about this week? Before we get into the nitty-gritty, is there anything specific that just jumped out at you that you want to just state? Okay, we're going to move on then.
There's one thing.
Okay, what?
Sorry, I was looking for it.
You're good.
And that was, I like the part, shoot, I'm trying to find which chapter it's in. It's in chapter 4 on page 73. And I agree with him. I never had a problem with the Big Bang Theory and creation story. To me, they didn't have to be either or. They could fit together quite well. And I love that part that says, for the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He's about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries.
Yeah.
And then he blew my mind with the next sentence. It's also possible there were universes before this one. Now, that honestly had never occurred to me before.
Okay.
Pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So last week we read the creation stories. And so now, based on we did that because we weren't ready for not everybody had an opportunity to read the book and so on and so forth. So we actually looked at two of the three stories. And so tonight we're going to take it from the story to what's in the story. So the creation story in itself, in the book he talks about it not being the beginning of ancient Israel, that Israel came into existence during the Exodus, which comes later in the Bible, and the creation story was written about 400 years later, after Exodus. Any comments on that? Okay.
I think it's true of most of the stories in the Bible. They started out as oral histories that were passed down through the generations, and they weren't written, any of them, until years after, the events supposedly happened, whether they were historical or not. So it doesn't surprise me that the stories weren't actually written until long after the events were supposed to have happened, because that's true all the way through. And it's like every time I think about, the fact that these were oral histories that were passed through the generations and finally written down when someone developed a way of writing, I think of that telephone game, remember, that we used to play all the time? Start out with one thing and you'd end up with something completely different. And I wonder how much variation there was from one generation of the story to the next as they were told as oral histories, because I mean, even in my family, people will tell stories about things that happened when I was a kid, and it'll be something that happened when I was there, and I'm listening to the story going, what are you talking about that? Well, and it's even not so much that the story itself has changed, but that the perception of the person who's telling the story is so much different than mine. It's like we weren't in the same place at the same time.
Yeah.
And I hear that all the time with my families when I do intakes with them. It's like, I'll have a couple come in who are no longer in a relationship, and they're talking to me about their relationship, and it's like, these two people never lived in the same house together, because their relationships, it's like, it's not the same relationship, and it really isn't.
Right. I used to wonder if my oldest sister lived in the same house as me.
Mm-hmm.
Because she would talk about stuff, and I would look at her and think, what parents were you raised by, and where were you raised? Because that's not my process. But she was 8 years older than me.
And there's a huge difference between the oldest and the youngest.
Yeah.
In the way kids are parented most of the time. It's like,
so how's it even close to being straight,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know if you've seen the commercial on TV for, I think it's for Love's Diapers, and the mom with her first child is, has the nanny coming in and wants to, and you've got 12 years of experience, but you don't have a PhD. And then with the second kid, the teenager shows up on the doorstep and she throws the baby at him and says, I'll be back later, and takes off. It's the difference between the first child and the second, because you learn as you go. So yeah, I think that it's very true that, people are parented differently. But in terms of this, it's going to depend on the perception of the person who is telling the story too, how it comes out.
Right.
Yes.
Very much so. Okay. So the peace story. How many of you had ever heard of it? In that written as the peace story and the J story.
I've heard of it, but I don't remember what it means.
No, I had not. The
Okay.
P story and the J story.
So the peace story begins with the earth as the formless void. The wind or the spirit of God moves over the waters and created the universe in the 6 days. So that's the one that the very first story in the Bible. And it's because we don't know where the original documentation, because it was probably oral and where it all came from. It's called the peace story. And then did you notice about in the peace story how you had the domain and then it's populated? So when you look at the breakdown of, okay, the domain, the light, the water and sky, and the dry land, and then it was populated. So the light was populated by the sun, the moon, and the stars. The water and the sky was populated by the sea life and the birds, and the dry land was populated by the land creatures. And then on the 7th day, we had a rest.
Mm-hmm.
And then,
I'm sorry.
okay,
I was really tickled to read about Adam, or however, Adam instead of Adam, which stood for humankind.
right.
Which may be where the name Adam comes from?
Yes, very much so. So humankind, or Adam, was created last in this version, and the male and female were created simultaneously.
Well, and it also says that God created humankind, so he created them. So there's nothing in this story, and I think I said this last week, we know that males and females were created. We don't know how many of each.
Right.
I mean, it could have been that that God created 100 people or more or less.
Could be. So then when we get into the J story, which is the second creation story, the one with Adam and Eve, it's the creation of humankind, and Adam, which is Adam, created man first, then then the garden, the beasts and the birds, then the woman out of his ribs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so so those were the first two stories that we looked at. The right PowerPoint? Oh, yeah. I wanted to see that. I think I missed something up here. Let me go back. The questions. So why did ancient Israel tell these stories? And why did they tell them in this way? Those are the two questions that really we're looking at. We're looking for the answers. Why did ancient Israel tell these stories, and why did they tell them this way? I think I missed that in the beginning here tonight. And so, last week we really didn't get into the creation story from Genesis 3, so we're going to look at that before we move on. The first sin and its punishment. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other wild animal that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God say you shall not eat from any tree in the garden?" The woman said to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden. But God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of any tree that is in the middle of the garden, nor shall you touch it, or you shall die." But the serpent said to woman, "You will not die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil."
So God was a liar to start with, eh?
Maybe. So when the woman saw the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made loincloths for themselves. They heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden at the time of the evening breeze, and the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. But the Lord God called to man and said to him, "Where are you?" He said, "I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself." He said, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree from which I commanded you not to eat?" The man said, "The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me the fruit from the tree, and I ate." Then Lord God said to the woman, "What is it that you have done?" The woman said, "The serpent tricked me, and I ate." The Lord God said to the serpent, "Because you have done this, cursed are you among all animals and among all wild creatures. Upon your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. I will put enemy between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will strike your head, and you will strike his heel." To the woman he said, "I will greatly increase your pangs in childbearing, and you shall bring forth children. Yet your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you." And to the man he said, "Because you have listened to the voice of your wife, and have eaten of the tree about which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In toil you should eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. But by the sweat of your face you shall eat bread until you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken. You are dust, and to dust you shall return. The man named his wife Eve because she was the mother of all living. And the Lord God made garments of skins for the man and for his wife, and clothed them. Then the Lord said, see, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. Now he might reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever. Therefore, the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from which he was taken. He drove out man, and at the east of the Garden of Eden, he placed the cherubim, and a sword flaming and turning to guard the way to the tree of life. So, we have a talking snake. We have the temptation, tree of knowledge, good and bad. Aware of nakedness or awareness. Consequence, punishment, named Eve and Adam, and banished from the garden. Why would ancient Israelites tell that story in that way? And what does the story mean to you? You don't, I mean, there's no right or wrong answers here.
I think part of it is, part of the stories that were told were ways that people tried to explain things that were happening that they didn't understand. So, we had these people, these Israelites who, had all of these issues that they were dealing with. It was difficult to grow food, and women had pain in childbirth, and all of that stuff that was part of their lives, and they didn't know why it was the way it was. So they came up with stories to explain it. I think that's part of the reason why a lot of the stories are the way they are.
And just from the evolution of humanity, you can see the evolution of who we might have been and where we might have come from. You're absolutely right.
Well, and I think we talked a little bit last week about the first two stories, the J story and the P story, that it seemed like one was written later than the other, and that the person who wrote the J story had an agenda. And so framed the story in such a way that the agenda that he was trying to push made sense based on that creation story.
Right. Yeah, we'll get into the agendas in a little bit. But that's absolutely right. So as we said, the stories functioned as the primitive science. It's what they knew of the world that they lived in. It was the explanation of the unknown. You were right on target. And to express her, which is Israel's, deepest convictions about God, the world, and human nature. And
I think it's interesting that he said that if man ate of the fruit, the tree of knowledge, he would become like us.
Right.
Not like me, but like us.
Correct. Because in that day and time, was there just one God? In Egypt, especially. So they're coming out of Egypt. There were many gods.
And I think it's about taking responsibility. Like even though the snake came into it, but if you listen to other people and you don't live life the way you're meant to live it, I think it shows grave consequences for that.
Very good. That's really good. Yep. So the peace story was written during or shortly after the exile in Babylon. And the sixth-day creation was the reinforcement for the day of Sabbath. And then the earth was the center of the universe for the Israelites. I mean, the earth was the center of the universe. They didn't know anything other than what they saw. And the creation story was how the people saw the world around them. So if you go back and you remember the dome, you know, if you look at the sky, it looks like it's a dome. If you ever saw the movie, The Dome, the TV series, The Dome, you know how you see what you see, and that's all you see. And that's how they explained it. So the Israel story is not God's story of creation, but it's the Israelite story of creation and how they perceived it. And so God as creator was a big part of this. So they saw God is the source of everything. God is creator. And it affirms the relationships and process, which continues to this day, especially in unity. So, because what do we say? God is the source.
Mm-hmm. The one and only.
One and only.
Mm-hmm.
Right. God is creator. And then they also were explaining the God-world relationship. So the supernatural theism, which is like a production model, but the way he explained it in the book, God makes something separate from God's self. So here we come into separation. And then the procreative or emanciation models, God's bringing forth the universe from God's being, of God or in God. So man is part of God, not separate from God. And then you get into the nature of reality. Being is good. I like that one. Not everything that happens supposed to be is good, but whatever exists is good. So that's one of our biggest teachings. It's not necessarily that it is good, but everything that exists is good.
Well, and I find it really interesting that when you read the first creation story, you know, at the end of the day, God looked at what God created and said it was good.
Mm-hmm.
And there is, as far as I'm aware, and I've been told this by people who have actually read the whole Bible, there's never any place in the Bible where God changes and says that something isn't good.
Correct.
So basically the creation story is God created all of this, said it was good, and it has remained good throughout time. We just don't necessarily, as human beings, don't necessarily use creation in ways that are good. It doesn't change the fact that creation is good. It just means that we're not using it in the way that it was intended.
Right. Even in the last story that we just read,
Mm-hmm.
nowhere did it say that what happened was bad. It just happened, and these are the consequences of that. But it doesn't say that it was a bad, that, you know, it's implied through our perception of it and our humanity around it, but it's not the reality of it. Genesis affirms the good creation of the good God. That's the reality of it. When you look at it from human nature, it's created in the image of God, given dominion. We talked about that a little bit last week. Dust creatures are finite and mortal. So we're created in the image of God and we're given dominion. We are dust creatures, finite and mortal. We are special and we are small and fine. Can you see where, if you were living in that time where that thought process could be? And is it any different today?
No, it's the paradox that we all live in. We're fully human and fully divine all at the same time.
Yeah.
And the whole purpose, the whole journey is to bring those two as closely together as possible, so that when we're we're acting out of our full divinity, it doesn't look a whole lot different than when we're acting out of our full humanness.
Right.
And we still live in this world of dualities. You know, all of us have traits and gifts, and you can take a gift that's really good most of the time, but taken to a certain extreme, it's not anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I think finding that balance, like you said, to get close to that edge where they meet is a dance we try to do all of our lives once we realize how important it is.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And that really is at least for me, a really big. It was a big aha moment when I realized that it's not about. It was about understanding that in my divinity, I'm also human, and all of my work is in my humanness, because my divinity is perfect all the time, and that's not going to change. And I've got a finite amount of time in this meat suit to express that humanness in such a way that allows me to do the things that I'm supposed to be doing while I'm here, because I'm here for a reason. And that, that was a big aha for me, was that it's the human part of me that I really get to focus on. I always assumed it was the spiritual part where I needed to work. It wasn't until I found Unity that I realized that the spiritual divine part of me is fine. It's figuring out how to make the human part of me line up with that.
That is huge.
Mm-hmm.
It is huge.
Yeah, because my experience anyway is that it was the complete opposite of what I was taught in the church that I grew up in. Mm-hmm. It was like, you're a human being and you're going to die, and unless you work on being as spiritual as you can be, you're not going to go to heaven. I mean, that was what I was taught. So all of that work was in the, expressing the spiritual side in an effective way. And so it was really big to figure out that I was doing it backwards.
Interesting.
I have no idea if that made any sense at all.
It did. It made sense.
It kind of sort of did.
You could write a whole book on that.
And I'm guessing people have.
Yeah. But we can always use another one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
So we got in, and we're getting, man, this computer, I love it, but it's very touchy. It's like my husband's. Okay, so we're getting into the character of our human existence that Robin was just talking about here. Fallen, so that fallen character is typically from the Christian point of view. It's not really talked about in ancient Israel. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Original sin, not the first sin, but sinfulness transmitted to every individual and generation. So original sin a lot of times is we think it's the first one, and that we fell, out of grace, committed sin. And really what it is transmitted. It's just sinfulness transmitted through human nature. And the original sin is attributed to Augustine in 400 CE. So it didn't exist until the thought came through the lens that he was looking through and created original sin, which is why Unity doesn't really believe in original sin. So what went wrong? So we fell. So how did we fall in humankind? How did the Israelites see themselves as fallen? Well, the Christians see themselves as fallen, because it wasn't, excuse me, I said that wrong. How did the Christians see themselves as fallen? And in the book, he lists the primal acts of disobedience, which basically is disobeying God, the lawmaker. So the laws that Moses brought being broken through disobedience. And those laws were God's laws. They weren't man's. They weren't Moses's. They were given to Moses from God. And then there are the primal acts of hubris, thank you,
Mm-hmm.
disobedient and focused on the act of giving oneself the place that belongs to God. So being God.
Well, yeah, because you'll be like God, knowing good from evil. It was, that act of disobedience was putting man on an even higher plane than where they belonged.
That's right.
Making ourselves like God.
That's right. And then you had the primal act as sloth, leaving it to the snake. You were talking about this earlier. Letting go of something else's authority over one's existence. So letting others make our decisions for us, or following the next guru or whatever it is, and not following our own inner self. And then, that's supposed to say the primal act as the birth consciousness, which is distinguishing one thing from another, above all self-world. Distinction and awareness of the world is the other. Thank oneself. Did I type that correctly?
Other than oneself. That's what it is.
Oneself. I was going to say that didn't seem right. Other than oneself.
Yeah. Like what it says when it says, all of us begin life in the womb with an experiential sense of undifferentiated unity. We begin in paradise, but the very process of growing up and the birth of consciousness that is intrinsic to it propels us into a world of division, anxiety, and suffering. Living east of Eden is intrinsic to the experience of being human. We all go through the fall and live in a state of exile and estrangement. It cannot be avoided.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think one of the things that he points out that's really important is the fact that as human beings, our consciousness as we become conscious, knowing the difference between things is part of what makes us conscious. And if we're not conscious, we're not human, basically. So it's part of it's something that all of us go through, and yet, if Adam and Eve hadn't eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, we would never be able to function as true human beings. So, original sin or original blessing.
Mm-hmm. Which is
That's good.
Yeah. So we come to the point where, is it truth or is it fiction? We begin our lives in paradise. We experience exploration into a world of exile, anxiety, self-preoccupation, bondage, and conflict. We're in a world, at the same time, we're in a world of goodness and beauty, creation of God, and the rest of the stories. They're the stories we tell ourselves. So when we're looking at these stories, are they truth or are they fiction? What is it?
I think it's a mixture myself. Something Robin said last week has stuck with me all week, how she wants the stories to be true. It makes her happy to think about the stories being true.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm really glad that the part of going to a Christian church when I was a little girl, we learned all those Bible stories, and they felt real to me.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I don't appreciate the context they were taught to us, I don't believe it. Little babies are born sinners, no. But I think that's really good. So it doesn't really matter to me what they are. they provide the basis we need to figure out where we've come from through their lens to where we are now. But I think writers today can be just as actually more relevant to today than these words were, which were written forever ago, you know?
Right. That's very true. So it doesn't really matter. These are just the myths and the truths that the Israelites lived through. So it's that part of evolution of humanity from their perspective through their life and stories, and how we have remained connected with them through the evolution of mankind using their text as the sacred. Because I was also taught the stories as a child in unity, with the exception of original sin. We were like the Israelites. We don't look at that.
And I find it really interesting that the Hebrew scriptures are actually the sacred text of Judaism, and Jews don't believe in original sin. It actually was something that was interpreted and added in by the Christian church at some point after Jesus.
Augustus 400 BC or CE.
It's very interesting that we can take someone else's spiritual text, sacred text, and twist something in there to make it work for whatever agenda it is or to explain something it was never intended to be there.
Yeah. But we do it every day.
Of course we do.
In existence. I mean, it happened yesterday here with the news and what actually happened here versus the way it was clipped and cut and put and presented to the masses. All right. So we're actually going to look now at say that word for me. Pentateuch. I'll get that one day. Which are the first 5 books. And we're just going to look at it as to what it was for the Israelites. So in the 5 books, there are 613 laws that were revealed by God to Moses at Mount.
Good grief.
Yeah, I thought there were only 10.
Yeah.
Because that's what do we know in Christianity? We know the 10 Commandments. But there were also ethical and ritual matters, which they considered to be laws. Civil and criminal laws. That functioned as these 5 books functioned as their constitutional and statutory law for ancient Israel.
Wow.
So it's like putting all of the millions of pages of laws that we have in civilization in North America alone, which is mind-boggling because it's not only at a federal level, it's at a state level and then a local level. So can you imagine what it would be like today? And then it's all grounded into the story that became the sacred law of the time. It told the story and it shaped how they lived. And to some extent, may still do that. I'm not quite sure how far that, how much it's changed in the last 2,000 years. but they're still considered the sacred laws.
Mhm.
Civil and criminal. So did they have a plethora of attorneys and judges as well?
Judges, yes.
Mhm.
Attorneys, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking if we had that many, well, we got tons, but what a mess.
Yeah, the attorneys would have been the lords.
Yes. Yeah.
The heads of the tribes, or
Mhm.
they would have been the attorneys, because that you would go if someone broke a law, the two people would go before the local Magite, or whatever they called him back then, the tribe leader, and he would deal out or what was law and what was the consequences for breaking that law. They had that in place. So if you did, say, for example, you stole somebody's animal, then you had to repay them with X amount of animals, or your daughter, or something else.
Mhm. Yeah, this is where that eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth comes from.
Exaggerated there a bit, but
Well, and it's interesting because a lot of, cat got my nose and it's bleeding, sorry.
Okay.
A lot of this is still actually followed by, a lot of it is in part of Sharia law and is followed by followers of Islam. A lot of this same stuff is also in their holy book. And
Yes.
that's why, you'll have people who are punished by having to give their daughter in marriage or, all of that stuff.
or caning, or
Yep.
whatever their laws are. Okay, it also says how we began as nomads, wandering without a home. We fell into slavery to the Lord Egypt. God heard us and liberated us from bondage. God gave us bountiful land in which to live. So that's pretty much what happens to us as humans today.
Mm-hmm.
We're born, we wander around trying to figure out who the heck we are. I mean, really, we fall into slavery to the materialistic world, whatever that is, to that human self-sufficient, self-sacrificing part of us. And then at some point, we typically hear God instead of God heard us. So we cry out to God, and we're liberated from our bondage because we actually go to the source and ask, and we're liberated. And then the realization comes that we're bountiful, we're abundant. That sounds like unity.
Mm-hmm.
Was it him? I can't remember. It has to be this. I can't find it right now. But history says that, see, the nomads, wanderers without a home, at that period in time, only asses had been domesticated. Camels had not been domesticated yet. Was that in here? I just read that like this week.
It could very well be. Which is why,
Not that it matters, but it's just funny.
oh yeah, it does say that. It's on page 88. It says, the effect of the assignment was a strong feeling of vertigo. Talking about the question of hysteroscopy. Okay. So I thought, let me see if I've got this right. Our tradition began with Abraham, but he might never have existed. And if he did, he was an ass nomad, not a camel nomad. Somewhat irrelevant, but not without fear and trembling. I wonder why, even if he did exist, I should take seriously what happened to him, an ass nomad from the 1700s BC. Now about anything. The foundation of the tradition seems to be crumbling. So yeah, when we get into the stories of Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebecca and Jacob, wow. Which is why Jesus rode in on a donkey,
Mm-hmm.
on an ass.
Yeah.
So that was what nobility would ride. I don't know if I read that in the book or if I read that somewhere else.
Right. Yeah, because that's what they had.
And what was the deal with the barrenness, with all the matriarchs being barren? You know, he promised a wonderful place to live and all of these descendants. And then it says, of the many stories of threats to the promise, I focus on a repeating theme about the mothers of Israel. The matriarchs are barren. It's just so funny when you, I mean, it could be like a comedy routine.
Yeah. So why do you think they told the stories of Israelite that about the barrenness? Why?
Well, I can read you the answer. But let me see if I can compose a better answer than that. God delivers, I think, would be the underlying theme.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So when there's no hope,
Mm-hmm.
when you're destitute and there's nothing, everything's impossible. You know, the
Yeah.
earth is impossible. There's no hope. It's that pipe dream. There's no future. We know that there's the promise from God. And with that,
That will stand.
the
Mm-hmm.
build.
Well, and I think it also points to the fact that the writers were trying to talk to the people that they were writing to say, sometimes it seems like things aren't going to happen the way they're supposed to, but if you just have faith, look what can happen.
Yeah.
So it was also, I think, a way of having people continue to believe, even in times when it was really hard to believe.
Yeah.
Because, if you're having trouble believing that something's going to happen, well, just look at Sarah. She was 90 years old when she had her first child.
Right. Okay. So we're actually going to look at some of the premedieval period, Genesis 4 through 11. Do we need to take a break for anybody? We good?
Good.
Okay. So, Cain murders Abel. Now the man knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have produced a man with the help of the Lord. Next she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a tiller of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground. And Abel, for his part, brought the firstlings of his flock, their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offerings, but for Cain and his offerings he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. The Lord said to Cain, why are you angry, and why has your countenance fallen? If you didn't do well, you will not be accepted. And if you do not do well, sin is lurking at the door. Its desire is for you, and you must master it. Cain says to his brother Abel, let us go out into the field. And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, where is your brother Abel? He said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? And the Lord said, what have you done? Listen, your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground. And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it will no longer yield to you its strength, and you will be a fugitive and a wanderer of the earth. Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Today you have driven me away from the soil, and I will be hidden from your face. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and anyone who meets me may kill me. Then the Lord said to him, not so. Whoever kills Cain will suffer a sevenfold vengeance. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, so that no one who came upon him would kill him. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. And then we have the beginning of civilization. So Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. And he built a city and named it Enoch after his son Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad was the father of
Oh my gosh.
Mehujael, and Mehujael the father of Methuselah.
Oh my gosh.
And Methuselah the father of Lamech. And Lamech took two wives, and the name of the one was Adah, and the name of the other was Zahah. Adah bore Jabal, and he was the ancestor of those who lived in the tents and have flocks. His brother's name was Jabal, and he was the ancestor of all those who play the lyre and the pipe. Zillah bore Tubal-Cain, who made all kinds of bronzes and iron tools. The sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. So now we're into the Bronze Age, where tools came from. Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Shelah, hear my voice. Your wives of Lamech, listen to what I say. I've killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain is avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 77-fold. Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and named him Seth. For she said, God has appointed for me another child instead of Abel, because Cain killed him. To Seth also a son was born, and he named him Ishmael. At that time, people began to evoke the name of the Lord. So Adam's descendants to Noah and his sons. This is the list of descendants of Adam. When God created humankind, he made them in the likeness of God. Male and female, he created them, and he blessed them and named them humankind when they were created. So we have another creation story here. When Adam had lived 130 years, he became the father of a son in his likeness, according to his image, and named him Seth. The days of Adam after he became the father of Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. When Seth had lived 105 years, he became the father of Enosh. Seth lived after the birth of Enosh 807 years, and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. When Enosh had lived 90 years, he became the father of Kenan. Enosh lived after the birth of Kenan 815 years, and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Enosh were 905 years, and he died. When Canaan had lived 70 years, he became the father of Mahalalel. Canaan lived after the birth of Mahalalel 840 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Canaan were 910 years, and he died. Why is all this important? Anybody? When Malah lived 665 years, he became the father of Jared. Mahalalel lived after the birth of Jared 830 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days were 895 years, and he died. When Jared had lived 160 years, he became the father of Enoch. And Jared lived after the birth of Enoch 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he became the father of Methuselah. Enoch walked with God after the birth of Methuselah 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God. Then he was no more because God took him.
How come he got taken by God and he didn't just die?
I don't know. How come he got taken by God and didn't just die?
And how come he only lived 365 years and everybody else was up around 800, 900? I don't know either.
When Methuselah had lived 187 years, he became the father of Lamech. Methuselah lived after the birth of Lamech 782 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. When Lamech had lived 182 years, he became the father of a son, and he named him Noah, saying, out of the ground that the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the toil of our hands. Lamech lived after the birth of Noah 595 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. After Noah was 500 years old, Noah became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
Good grief.
Oh, we're not done yet.
So is that all the 12 tribes? Is that why that's important?
Yeah.
Or was it just a lesson in genealogy?
But, so it is the 12 tribes and Noah, and how we have another creation story in Noah because of the wickedness that is on earth. We're going to destroy it, and we're going to create a new covenant. So it's a new agreement. So we have these nomads wandering across the earth. And then we continue forth. And I didn't put all the story of Noah up there, so let's go. I didn't think I would. I thought it was going to take me longer to get through all that than it did tonight, so let's go. I'm going to go over here for a minute.
I do have to say, Mackenzie called the very day that I was reading about Noah and his wife and God wrestling with Noah, and I thought it was very intuitive of her to know to circumcise her son and touch the foreskin to Noah so God would leave him alone. And that very day, Mackenzie called because she was traumatized. She had seen her first circumcision.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, she was in labor and delivery this past week. So she saw cesarean sections, which also traumatized her. she helped deliver 2 babies, and she saw a circumcision. It is the best form of birth control I could ever have wished for.
It's true. Yeah. So the story just continues about our humankind and who we are, and trying to make sense of all the evil that we saw in the world, which really wasn't probably half as what we see today. But it's interesting that, like Robin said, the one dude, Enoch, didn't die, but he was taken to God. And then from his lineage comes Noah. So that's where a part of the covenant starts and the promise. And then we have a new creation story. And then we continue on. We still have the 12 tribes of Israel, but now it's in a different perspective. What else from Noah's story? I'm sorry I didn't finish. I don't know where my brain was at. What else from Noah's story when you read it stuck out for you? Did you have a version that had his wife's name in it?
I think it was, but I can't remember how to pronounce it.
If I remember correctly, it's Namea, and she was listed as one of the females up here. Hold on. She was she was one of the tribes. And, the sister of Tubal-Cain was Namea.
And that's Noah's wife.
And that's Noah's wife.
And I think part of the reason why we keep getting these, this person was the father of this person, was the father of this person, was because it's tracing, for the Jewish people, the Messiah was a really big deal, and they needed to be able to trace the lineage of the Messiah back to David based on the prophecies. So, I'm not sure when all of these stories were written in comparison to like when the prophets and stuff, but it was very important for the Jewish people to be able to trace the lineage of these important people back to the very beginning. And I still find it interesting, since most of the time Jews trace their lineage through their mother, and yet in the Bible it's all through their fathers, because it's, it was written by patriarchs,
Right.
even though it's a matriarchal society.
Yes. So when did that change?
I don't know. Maybe you can look that up and tell us next week.
There you go.
Okay. What? Yeah, don't ask questions. You'll have to look it up. All right, I'll look it up.
It is interesting, though, that the one guy didn't die. He was taken by God.
Mm-hmm. It is. Trying to find it in here.
I've got to stand up for a minute. Excuse me. Oh.
So it says in here as we continue on that and I kind of alluded to it in my last slide, that why did the Israelites tell these stories, and why did she tell them this way? And it's all about the promise and the fulfillment. That's really what the promise is found in the dramatic beginning of the story of Abraham and Sarah in Genesis 12, 1 through 2. And God calls the two of them to leave home and family and embark on a journey to a land they do not know. Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. The promise is twofold, the land of Canaan and a multitude of descendants. The rest of the Bible is the story of the fulfillment of this promise. It ends several hundred years later with the descendants of Abraham at the Jordan River, ready to cross over to Canaan and the Promised Land. The theme of the promise and the fulfillment is central not only to the Bible as a whole, but to many of the individual stories. And I'm sorry, I said Bible, and it's the Pentateuch. The stories often dramatize and intensify the theme of promise and fulfillment by adding the third element, the threat. A threat to the promise, a formidable obstacle to the fulfillment. As in a sacred melodrama, the ancestors find themselves in one predicament after another. Will God be able to fulfill the promise despite what looks like hopeless circumstances? And that's what the rest of those 5 stories are about. Fairness of the matriarchs, that's one obstacle. Joseph and his brothers is another obstacle. The Exodus in itself. I love that it goes into a couple of generations of Americans have had their impressions of the Exodus shaped by Cecil B. DeMille's 1950 epic movie, The Ten Commandments, still shown each year near Easter on network television. Though the movie allows itself some Hollywood license, it basically takes the Bible story literally. God speaking to Moses through the burning bush, sending the 10 plagues against Egypt, dividing the sea into 2 towering walls of water with a canyon of dry land between them, writing the 10 Commandments on 2 tablets of stone with a flaming finger, and so forth. Like all literalizations of metaphoric narratives, it makes the story frankly incredible. But it's basically rooted in the human historical experience of ancient Israel. The memory of having been Pharaoh's slaves in Egypt is printed on the pages of the Hebrew Bible and etched into the life of ancient Israel. And also, not only in the Pentateuch, but in the Psalms and the writings of the prophets, as well as Israel's rituals and liturgies. He goes on to explain more about Egypt and the bondage and Moses. Have you guys read most of this already?
Mm-hmm.
I would quit at Egypt today.
Okay. The confrontation with Pharaoh and the plagues. It's all about the drama of human Bible. The liberation in the sea, and then Sinai and the covenant. So what happens at Sinai occupies a major portion of the Pentateuch. It takes the narrative of Exodus, 18 chapters, to tell the story of bondage in Egypt, the call of Moses, the confrontations with pharaohs and the plagues, the departure from Egypt, the crossing of the seas, and the journey to Sinai. The events at Sinai take the remaining 22 chapters of Exodus. All of the 27 chapters of Leviticus and the first 10 chapters of Numbers. Yeah. And it says, he goes on to say the giving of the law, most of the laws were given at the Sinai, the Ten Commandments in two slightly different forms, the Book of the Covenant, the rest of the laws of Exodus,
Leviticus,
and
Deuteronomy.
I'm getting tired here.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
It is clear that all these laws, drawn from many different periods in Israel's history, have accumulated over centuries. Okay? So these books weren't written in a day. And there's over 613 laws of this, is what I said earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And until we get to the promised land. And what's that got to do with us today? Why do we still read Israel's perception of the world?
Well, if you read the Bible from the metaphysical, metaphorical standpoint, those stories are still illustrative of what we go through as we rise in consciousness. You know, we've gone from a point of needing, you know, just as human beings, we've gone from that point of needing someone to spell out every single law and rule and regulation because we don't know how to function in society and how to act as a you know, human being with other people when we're little, to the point of, as we grow older and raise in consciousness, you know, we're not as bound by those laws any longer because we're following them without having to be reminded in every moment. So it's still our story if you read it that way.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't read it that way, I'm not sure.
Well, it's still humankind's pattern.
Mm-hmm.
It's still our pattern of existence. We're still creating the laws for society to live by. We just have new ones every day.
Mm-hmm.
It's you know, it's that whole evolution of consciousness. For me, it's that whole evolution of consciousness of the human development through one tribe in one section of the world that was able to capture their story and continue it and write it down when the rest of the society didn't really function at that level at that time.
Mm-hmm.
That was good.
It made sense? Yeah.
Yeah.
They existed, but maybe not at the level of development that area of the world was at that time. You know, you have the cave drawings in France, and some literature there. You have the Native American who basically told stories and to this day continue to tell the stories. So for that to be the continuation is to tell the stories. And the Irish, I mean, that's the storytellers, and never really concerned with writing them down. That was just the mode. Let's tell the story. The storytellers. They went from town to town as civilization grew. The storytellers followed from town to town. The court jesters.
Mm-hmm.
Struggles and drama and liberation.
Yeah.
The makings of a good movie or novel, right?
Yep. And it's our daily life.
Yes.
And it continues in humanity. Yeah. Gets played out all the time. All right, so what else? Let's see.
I was thinking that the plague sounded a lot like our political process today.
The plague sound like our political process today?
Yes.
And
Getting pecked to death by chickens. Getting pecked to death by chickens.
oh,
Driving me slowly crazy.
uh-huh. I mean, where do we see plagues at today? We see them continue. What do we have? The latest one is the what is that? Zika.
Yep, the Zika
The new mosquito.
virus. Mhm.
And this stuff, like, it feels like it comes out of nowhere. You won't have heard of anything. You know, one of the most interesting things I ever did at where I worked in occupational medicine, I had to develop a plan for our chemical plant in the event that bird flu hit. What would we do? How much would we have to shut down because people wouldn't come into work? They'd be more concerned with their families. That was so interesting. You know, so we ended up calling it an all hazards plan because it didn't matter what hit, we had to be good to go. And you could do all the planning in the world, and then it'll be something like the Zika virus, which we're finding more about every day. But doesn't it feel like it comes from nothingness, and then all of a sudden it's here, and it is a critical issue?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Just like they did.
and that's the truth of it.
Yeah.
You know, we don't worry so much about the locusts anymore because we have chemicals that kill them off. But now we have this new development of this Zika mosquito virus that is affecting babies. You know, so you can get exposed to this, and when you're pregnant, then it creates the deformities in the child.
Mhm.
And they're saying
So we're
now,
not hearing
oh, go
anything
ahead.
about Ebola anymore.
Mm-mm.
No, because right now it's under control, but that may change when the heat comes back.
Mhm.
And you know, they've just found out that it's more of an issue than they thought because they have found Zika in the sperm of males 60 days later.
Wow.
Yeah.
So now we're looking at the organisms that probably have been around since who knows when. But as we become more aware of what is around and we develop vaccines or whatever it is to combat it and to make it non-existent, or maybe not necessarily non-existent, but we have control over it,
Mhm.
then we find something new that could be around for years. Because isn't it like, I'm not exactly sure, and I could be wrong here, but isn't it like the elephant boy, the
Deformity?
deformity? Isn't it very similar to that?
Zika?
Yeah. The deformity.
No, elephant means large and grotesque. Large.
Right.
Zika the head is so small and the brain is so deformed. It's, their heads are tiny.
Oh, so it's the opposite.
It's the opposite.
It's-
Yeah.
Yeah, yes,
The
exactly.
brains are smaller.
The
Yeah.
brains are smaller. Okay. So yeah.
Well, and it's interesting that, every time one of these viruses shows up and then we find some way to combat it, then it evolves and it changes and to become resistant to whatever it is that we found to use against it. And that's true of all kinds of stuff. So, there's like the superbugs that antibiotics won't touch now because they've evolved to the point where the antibiotics that we have don't work.
Yep.
So much for people who don't believe in evolution.
Mhm. I mean, it's there. It's in this book and it's in our everyday lives.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else? Okay. We might end a little early tonight so that Helen can.
It's okay. We covered a lot of ground.
Well,
Good.
it was a lot, to try to get through, and going through the patriotic period was just like, okay. Is there anything, because I kind of skipped that one over totally other than the big parts of it. Is there anything in the patriotical period that we really need to cover? And if you find something you want to talk about it more next week, we can certainly do that. Okay, so I think I have. Okay, so our homework will be to finish reading chapter 5. And we really took care of the period of Genesis 6 through 11, and we talked about most of the period of Genesis 12 through 50, so you can scratch those off. But we will look more at the Exodus, the covenant, the conquest of Canaan, and the United Kingdom and the divided kingdom of Israel and Judah. Okay.
Okay.
And if you get through that, you can start on chapter 6, which is about the prophets. So we'll end tonight with our love offering. And so we just consciously become aware of that love that we each have and that we share with each other. And say our prosperity proclamation together. Divine love through me.
I love has me blesses
And multiply.
and multiplies
That I am,
all that I am, all that I have,
All that I
All that
all that I give, all that I receive.
Thank you, God.
sometimes I can't even read it right.
It's okay.
It's late on Wednesday.
It is. So anything that we need for next week? I'm supposed to look up something. What am I supposed to look up? I mean, write it down as I'll forget.
What are you supposed to look up?
What was I supposed to look up? Who remembers?
Some
I think it
profound.
was when it switched from matriarchal to patriarchal. Tracing the lineage.
Yeah. Okay, I'll look that up.
And guess who was the author of that question? She is good now.
Yeah. So Jenny didn't join us, but I did at the very beginning of class. I was distracted because I was looking at my phone. I text her to see if she was going to join us, and she said, I forgot, I'm sorry. I'll be there next week. Can you send me the recording? So I will send her the recording, and she will join us next week. She just got back from
Awesome.
vacation. She was on vacation last week.
That's a good reason to forget.
So, and then she and I can have a talk and see where we're at.
Oh, excuse me.
And I will eventually get these up on the website. I'm getting closer to getting that done every day. So I appreciate each and every one of you and your patience and your love. And hopefully I will see you all on Sunday. Jenny, you get to feeling better. If you need anything,
Yes.
know.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Now, you're not going to be here this weekend, are you?
No, I'm leaving tomorrow to go see Mackenzie in Virginia.
That's what I thought. That's what Patrick said.
All right.
Yeah. Patrick's coming with me, so he won't be there this week either. I guess he already told Dottie.
Yeah, he told us on Sunday.
Okay.
Have a safe and fun trip.
Yep. Safe
Yes.
travels to
Thank
all.
you.
Love you all.
Oh, and keep Sean in your prayers, please. He has flu A. He was at the doctor's today running a fever of 103.
Ah,
Blue A.
Yeah,
Oh,
he tested positive for flu A.
okay.
ugh.
We will keep him in
So
our prayers.
Mm-hmm.
thank you. All right.
I'll see you guys Sunday and at the
Talk
board.
to you all.
Night,
Oh,
everybody.
yes, our annual meeting is Sunday.
Yeah.
Okay.
See you then.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.